In my father's eyes, I would always be a child playing with pocket money, even when my pockets were deeper than his. He saw my life as a quaint hobby, a little garden I tended to, while my sister's was a grand stage he was determined to produce. The latest production was Sophie's engagement party. The family was gathered around the dining room table, a flurry of excitement and expensive ideas. My sister, Sophie, glowed, her new fiancé, James, sitting proudly beside her, already a seamless part of the family portrait I never quite fit into. They were scrolling through websites on a laptop, their faces illuminated by images of fairy tale venues. My mother, Linda, would gasp periodically, while my father, David, would nod with the serious air of a man who took his daughter's happiness as a reflection of his own success. "Oh, David, look at this one," my mother said, pointing to the screen. It was a place called the Conservatory, a stunning historical building with glass walls, filled with exotic trees and flowers, draped in twinkling lights. It was breathtaking. It was perfect for Sophie. A wave of anxiety washed over my sister's face as she saw the price list. "It's beautiful," she sighed, "but... wow. That's a lot." James wrapped an arm around her, his expression agreeing with the daunting numbers on the screen. This was my moment. A surge of genuine love and affection for my sister rose up in me, silencing the familiar feeling of being the odd one out. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to give her this perfect day, to finally be seen as a capable, adult part of this family. "Sophie, it's incredible," I said, leaning forward, my voice full of sincere excitement. "I would love to help. Seriously. As my engagement gift to you and James, I could cover the deposit for the venue. We could book it." The words hung in the air, a heartfelt, generous offer. I looked at my sister, whose eyes widened with surprise and relief. For a split second, I felt a flicker of connection, of belonging. And then, my father laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was worse. It was a short, condescending chuckle, the kind you give a toddler who offers to pay for groceries with a crayon drawing. He shook his head, a paternalistic smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Alice, that's very sweet of you," he said, his voice patronizing. "But you can't afford something like this. Let the adults handle the real finances, okay? We'll figure it out." The air was sucked out of the room. My offer wasn't just rejected, it was belittled, dismissed as a childish fantasy. He hadn't said, "No, thank you." He had said, "You are not capable." He announced my perceived inadequacy to the entire table. Sophie's face flushed with embarrassment for me. James suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. My mother just gave a tight little smile and looked away. No one defended me. No one corrected him. His word was final. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that spread from my chest to my face. I felt like a child who had been publicly scolded for trying to sit at the grown-ups' table. My sincere gift had been twisted into a proof of my naivete. I looked at the glowing picture of the conservatory on the laptop screen. A moment ago, it had been a symbol of my sister's happiness. Now, it was just another beautiful room I wasn't allowed to enter, another door my father had quietly, firmly, and publicly shut in my face. My father's dismissal wasn't born from a single moment of cruelty, it was a belief system he had cultivated for over 20 years. In our family, there were two paths for a daughter, and I had chosen the wrong one. My sister, Sophie, was the golden child, the one who followed the map my parents had laid out for her. From childhood, Sophie excelled in ways that were easy to display on a mantelpiece. Ballet trophies, pageant ribbons, a prom queen sash. She was beautiful, popular, and her achievements were legible, easily translated into bragging rights for my father at his golf club. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. The artistic one. While Sophie was at dance practice, I was learning to code in my bedroom. While she was at cheerleading camp, I was reading books on urban planning and sustainable architecture. My interests were strange, solitary things that didn't make for good stories at dinner parties. This divergence continued into our careers. Sophie got a degree in communications from the State University, then took a respectable marketing job at a well-known firm. Her path was a straight, clean line. It was a career my father could describe, understand, and therefore, respect. My path was different. After college, I didn't apply for corporate jobs. I started my own company. A small, niche real estate firm focused on acquiring and retrofitting old, forgotten commercial buildings into sustainable, green community spaces. It was complex, slow, and quiet work. To my father, my being self-employed was just a polite way of saying unemployed. He couldn't grasp it. There was no big corporate logo, no predictable promotions, no clear ladder to climb. He saw a girl playing with old buildings, not an entrepreneur building an empire. I would try to explain my successes to him. A complex zoning variance I'd secured, a major grant I'd won for a historical preservation project. His eyes would glaze over. He'd nod and say, "That's nice, honey," before immediately changing the subject to Sophie's latest minor accomplishment at her very important, very real job. My sister's success was a straight line they could applaud. Mine was a messy blueprint they refused to read. They didn't want to understand it, because its success would challenge their entire narrative of who I was supposed to be, the quirky, less successful, backup daughter. So when I offered to pay for the venue, he didn't hear a successful businesswoman making a generous offer. He heard the little girl who used to prefer books to ballet, the one whose life choices had always been a quiet disappointment to him. He simply couldn't compute the idea that my hobby could possibly generate the kind of money required to book a place like the conservatory. In his mind, I was still the child playing with her pocket money. After the humiliating dinner, I went home to my quiet apartment. On the windowsill sat a small, meticulously cared-for succulent. It was a rare varietal, one that took years of patience and specific knowledge to cultivate. My dad had seen it once and chuckled, "Still playing in the dirt, Alice?" I touched one of its healthy, thriving leaves. He saw a tiny, insignificant plant in a pot. He had no concept of the deep, complex root system beneath the surface. He had no idea how much it was truly worth. It was the perfect metaphor for how he saw my life. He measured my success by the size of the flower, never bothering to check the strength of the roots. My value in his eyes was fixed, determined years ago. And no amount of quiet, steady growth on my part seemed to be able to change his mind. The red flags began the moment the engagement ring was on my sister's finger. They were small at first, little dismissals and oversights that I tried to brush off as the chaotic excitement of wedding planning. But they were all part of the same pattern, a pattern of quietly, consistently, underestimating me. When the family first started talking about an engagement party, I was genuinely excited to help. My work involves event spaces, project management, and coordinating vendors. I had real, practical skills to offer, and I naively thought they would finally see value in my expertise. I made my first suggestion, a beautifully restored industrial loft space I knew of, which could be decorated to be both modern and romantic. Before I could even finish my sentence, my father waved a dismissive hand. "No, no, Alice. We need something traditional. Classic. Not one of your strange warehouse places." My idea wasn't even considered. It was instantly categorized as strange simply because it came from me. That was the first red flag. My professional opinion was worth less than his outdated notion of what an engagement party should be. Soon, I noticed a planning committee had been formed without my knowledge. It consisted of my mother, my father, and Sophie. I'd walk in on them huddled around the kitchen table, whispering over fabric swatches or caterer menus. When they saw me, they would stop talking or change the subject. They would then announce decisions in front of me as if I were a distant cousin. "Your father and I are taking Sophie to a cake tasting on Saturday," my mother would inform me, not invite me. I was being given updates on a life event I was supposed to be a central part of. The financial slights started small, too. Sophie fell in love with a set of expensive, letterpressed invitations. The cost was significant but manageable. "I can take care of those," I offered cheerfully, wanting to contribute something concrete. My mother patted my hand. "That's sweet of you, dear, but don't you worry about it," she said with a tight smile. "We want to make sure everything is handled." She said it as if my money was somehow less capable than theirs, less real. They didn't see my offer as a generous gift. They saw it as a risk, as if my contribution might somehow fail or not be good enough. They were protecting my sister's perfect party from my perceived incompetence. Then came the assignments. While the three of them made all the major decisions about the venue, the guest list, and the menu, they would occasionally throw me a bone, a small, menial task to make me feel involved. "Alice, maybe you can be in charge of the party favors," my father suggested one night. "Something simple. You're good at that sort of thing." The task was a pat on the head, a chore you'd give a teenager to keep them busy, not a responsibility you'd give a capable adult. They were drawing a clear boundary around me. I was allowed to participate, but not to contribute in any meaningful way. My role was to be a helper, a subordinate, a silent supporter on the sidelines of my own family. Every one of these moments was a small paper cut, a tiny wound that stung more than it bled. They were all reinforcing the same unspoken message: you are not one of us. You are not on our level. So, when I finally made the grand offer to pay for the venue deposit, I should have known what was coming. I was offering to buy a seat at the main table after they had already assigned me to the kids section. Their view of me was so fixed, so deeply ingrained, that my offer wasn't just surprising to them, it was utterly inconceivable. And my father's laughter wasn't just a dismissal, it was the loud, final confirmation of every red flag I had tried so hard to ignore. My offer hung in the air, shimmering with sincerity. For a heartbeat, I saw a look of genuine hope flash across my sister's face. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension of the venue's cost momentarily lifted. In that split second, we were just two sisters, and I was helping her. Then my father started to laugh. It began as a low chuckle in his chest, then grew into a full, condescending laugh that he didn't even try to stifle. He looked around the table, a performer seeking affirmation from his audience, his eyes twinkling with amusement at my expense. "Oh, Alice," he said, shaking his head as if I were a hopelessly charming but clueless child. He wiped a fake tear of mirth from his eye. The warmth that had been in the room moments before curdled into something cold and sharp. "That is a very sweet thought, honey," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you can't afford that." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was stating the color of the sky. It wasn't an opinion. To him, it was an undeniable fact. My financial inadequacy was a given. He wasn't done. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table as if to explain a very complex concept to someone very slow. "This is a serious deposit, for a serious venue. It requires real money, a stable and predictable income. The last thing we want is for you to get into financial trouble trying to play grown-up." The insult was wrapped in a sickening blanket of fake concern. He wasn't just saying no. He was publicly declaring me financially unstable, irresponsible, and naive. He was protecting me from my own foolish generosity, cementing his role as the wise patriarch and mine as the floundering child. I looked to my mother for support, but she just gave me a tight, pained smile and a tiny shrug, as if to say, "You know how your father is. Just let it go." Her silence was a betrayal, a quiet vote in favor of my humiliation. Sophie wouldn't meet my eyes. The glimmer of hope she'd had was gone, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. She was caught between gratitude for my offer and her lifelong habit of deferring to our father. As always, deference won. Her fiancé, James, had a faint, smug smirk on his face. No one spoke up for me. The silence at the table was their unanimous agreement with my father's assessment. In that moment, I had never felt more alone, more completely outside the invisible walls of my own family. My father, satisfied that he had re-established the natural order of things, waved his hand dismissively. "It's handled. Sophie's mother and I will take care of the finances. We've been saving for this." The lie was effortless. I knew for a fact they had no such savings. Then he delivered the final, belittling blow, turning to me with that same patronizing smile. "You just focus on your little projects, Alice. Maybe you can design the place cards." He had reduced my entire career, my life's work, to a craft project. The humiliation was complete. He hadn't just rejected my offer, he had used it as an opportunity to publicly reinforce my status as the lesser daughter. He had put me firmly back in my place. The conversation moved on, back to the caterers and the color schemes, as if nothing had happened. They left me sitting there, my generous offer turned to ash in my mouth, my face burning with a shame that wasn't even mine. I was a ghost at the table, visible only when they needed someone to remind of how small she was. My father had made his point clear: in this family, my only role was to be quietly, and gratefully, underestimated. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and a hollow ringing in my ears. My father's condescending laugh was on a loop in my head, a cruel soundtrack to my own humiliation. Each chuckle, each dismissive word, was a fresh wave of shame washing over me. I walked into my apartment, the one I had bought with my own money, furnished with my own taste, and it felt like a stranger's home. It was a testament to a life they refused to acknowledge. A life that, in their eyes, made me an object of pity, not pride. I sank onto my sofa, the silence of the room amplifying the noise in my head. The anger came first. A cold, quiet fury at the injustice of it all. How could he be so blind, so determined to keep me small in his mind? How could my mother and sister sit there and let him? But the anger was a thin sheet of ice over a deep, dark ocean of hurt. It was the profound, soul-deep pain of realizing that you are fundamentally unseen by the people who are supposed to know you best. It wasn't just that he had insulted my career or questioned my finances. He had invalidated my entire reality. He looked at my life, at the success I had painstakingly built, and saw nothing more than a child's game, a little project. All the years of hard work, the risks I'd taken, the nights I'd spent poring over blueprints and contracts until my eyes burned. What was it all for? I had always hoped, on some subconscious level, that my success would be a bridge to my father's respect. Now I saw with devastating clarity that it was the opposite. My success was a wall. It was something so foreign to his understanding of me that he couldn't compute it. It was easier for him to deny it, to belittle it, than to adjust his long-held perception of me as the quirky, less capable daughter. He didn't want a successful, independent daughter. He wanted a daughter who needed him, one whose life fit neatly into the box he had built for her. My sister, Sophie, fit into her box perfectly. I had built my own world, and he would never forgive me for it. I looked around my apartment, at the evidence of my competence and my taste, and a wave of utter futility washed over me. It felt like I had spent my life carefully crafting a masterpiece, only to show it to a blind man. I showed them my success, and they asked me if I had a hobby. That was the core of it. They would never, ever see me for who I truly was, because they had decided who I was a long, long time ago. The fight just drained out of me, leaving me exhausted and empty. What was the point of trying to prove them wrong when they weren't even looking at the evidence? You can't win a debate with someone who refuses to listen. I walked over to the window and looked at the small, thriving succulent on the sill. My little plant. For the first time, I saw it through my father's eyes, small, contained, insignificant. A fitting hobby for his insignificant daughter. The collapse was a quiet surrender. A giving up. It was the crushing realization that I could build an empire, and my father would still only ever see the little girl playing in the dirt. I curled up on the sofa, pulling a blanket around me, and felt a loneliness so absolute it was like a physical presence in the room. I was being punished not for my failures, but for a success they would never have the grace to acknowledge. For a few days, I let myself drift in that sea of despair. I went to work, I answered emails, I moved through the world like a ghost. The fire in my belly had been replaced by a cold, hollow ache. I had accepted their narrative. I was the small daughter with the small life. Then, my sister Sophie called me, her voice tight with panic. "Alice, it's a disaster," she said, on the verge of tears. "The conservatory. We went to see it in person, and it's even more perfect than the pictures. But they won't let us book it." I felt a flicker of sympathy for her genuine distress. "What do you mean? Is it too expensive?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion it would have held a week ago. "No, it's not that," she said, frustrated. "They said it's not available for any private events. At all." The manager, a Mr. Chen, was very polite but firm. He said the venue is undergoing a change in management and all new bookings are on hold indefinitely. My father, she explained, was furious. He was blaming the venue, the new management, anyone but himself. Their dream venue was gone, and now they were scrambling to find a replacement, each option a pale imitation of the original. Something in her story sparked a flicker of professional curiosity in me, the first non-numb feeling I'd had in days. A historic property changing hands, freezing all event bookings. It was the kind of industry news I followed closely. After we hung up, I couldn't shake it. On a whim, I logged into my company's central server. My firm specialized in acquiring and redeveloping historic urban properties. We had dozens of projects in various stages across the country. It was a long shot, but I typed the conservatory into our internal asset database. My heart stopped. There it was. Acquired 3 months ago by a subsidiary holding company that I owned. The deal had been handled by my acquisitions team while I was swamped with another project. I had signed the final papers, but the name had been one of dozens. I hadn't just offered to pay the deposit for the venue. I had offered to pay myself. My father had laughed me out of the room for offering to put a down payment on a building I owned. The world tilted and then snapped back into place with a new, terrifying clarity. I pulled up the project management files for the property. I saw the name of the new site manager my team had hired, Mr. Chen. Then I saw the reason for the booking freeze. It was a memo from my own office, under my own authority. All new private event bookings for the conservatory are to be suspended immediately in preparation for the Our Green Legacy renovation project, pending final approval. The Green Legacy project was my passion project, a massive, multi-million-dollar plan to retrofit historic buildings with cutting-edge sustainable technology. I was the one who had put the hold on the bookings. I was the new management. I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. The despair, the shame, the feeling of being small, it all evaporated in a sudden, blinding flash of incandescent rage and hysterical irony. My father had told me I couldn't afford to get into the club. He had no idea I owned the entire building, and that I was about to remodel it from the ground up. The keys to the conservatory weren't something I needed to ask for. They were already mine. And my family was about to find that out in the most public way imaginable. My revenge didn't begin with a triumphant phone call. It began with a quiet, deliberate email to my new site manager, Mr. Chen. "Please schedule a final walkthrough of the conservatory for next Saturday at 11 a.m., I wrote. "I will be meeting with some family members on site to discuss the future of the venue. You may inform them that a representative of the new ownership will be present." The trap was set. The beauty of it was its simplicity. I wasn't going to them, they were coming to me. They were walking into my world, on my terms, completely unaware that they had already crossed the threshold. Next, I called my sister. I let a note of feigned sympathy and effort enter my voice. "Sophie," I said, "I know how much the conservatory meant to you. I did some digging through some of my industry contacts. And I think I might have pulled a string. I got you a meeting." I could hear the hope surge in her voice. Alice, are you serious? With who? The new management, I said, the words tasting sweet and ironic. A representative will meet you there on Saturday morning to discuss the situation. No promises, but it's a chance to plead your case. She gushed with gratitude, promising to tell our father immediately. I knew exactly what he would think, that my little contacts had managed to get them a low-level meeting, a chance for him, the great patriarch, to step in and negotiate with his superior skills. He would walk in expecting to be the hero. The days leading up to Saturday were filled with a strange, exhilarating calm. I wasn't nervous. I was a director watching her actors take their places for the final scene. I tended to my little succulent on the windowsill, a quiet smile on my face. My father thought my world was this small pot. He was about to find out it was a glass palace. My mother called once, her tone suspicious. Sophie tells me you arranged some sort of meeting. I hope you haven't overstepped, Alice. These are serious business people. I just made a phone call, Mom, I said, my voice a placid lake. The rest is up to Dad. I knew that feeding his ego was the surest way to get him to the slaughter. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the conservatory an hour early. I walked through the vast, sun-drenched halls, the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids filling the air. This was my space. The quiet hum of the irrigation systems was the sound of my success. Mr. Chen, a sharp, impeccably dressed man, greeted me with a respectful bow. Ms. Evans, everything is prepared as you requested. He handed me a simple, heavy ring of keys. The master keys. I slipped them into my pocket. I chose my position carefully, not in an office, but in the main atrium, standing by a magnificent fountain, as if I were just another visitor admiring the flora. I wanted them to see the venue first, to feel the full weight of what they had lost before they saw me. At precisely 11 a.m., I saw them enter through the grand glass doors. My father, David, was in the lead, puffing out his chest, ready for battle. My mother, Sophie, and James followed in his wake. They looked around, their faces a mixture of awe and frustration. They didn't see me at first. They were too busy looking for a man in a suit, a manager, someone they could talk down to. They approached Mr. Chen, who was waiting for them. We're here for the meeting about the engagement party, my father said, his voice booming with unearned authority. Mr. Chen gave a polite, practiced smile. Of course. The owner is ready to see you now. He turned, and with a simple, elegant gesture, he pointed directly at me. She is waiting for you by the fountain. 4 pairs of eyes turned in unison, following the line of Mr. Chen's outstretched hand. They landed on me. The confusion on their faces was a sight I would cherish for the rest of my life. It was a slow-motion car crash of perception. My father was the first to react, letting out a short, incredulous laugh. No, no, he said to Mr. Chen, waving his hand as if to dismiss a foolish mistake. We're here to see the new owner. A man, I presume? Mr. Chen did not flinch. His expression remained one of placid professionalism. Yes, sir, he said, his voice calm and clear. You are. That is Ms. Alice Evans, the owner of this property. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the gentle trickle of the fountain beside me. I watched the blood drain from my father's face, his arrogant posture deflating like a punctured balloon. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. Sophie looked back and forth between me and our father, her mind struggling to connect two completely irreconcilable ideas, the sister she pitied and the powerful woman standing before her. James just stared, his jaw slack. In that one moment, the entire architecture of our family, the foundation of lies and dismissals built over decades, crumbled into dust. The narrative was broken. The king had no clothes. I let them stand there in their silent shock for a long moment before I started walking toward them. I moved calmly, my footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor. I stopped a few feet from my father, the man who had laughed at my offer just a week ago. Hello, Dad, I said, my voice even, holding his gaze. Mr. Chen told me you wanted to discuss booking an engagement party. He sputtered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on land. This is one of your little projects. The words were a choked whisper. He was finally seeing the truth, and it was a reality so far beyond his comprehension that he couldn't even form a coherent sentence. I gave him a small, sad smile. The anger was gone. All I felt was a profound sense of release. He could no longer hurt me, because I no longer needed his approval. His opinion had been rendered, finally and irrevocably, irrelevant. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy ring of master keys Mr. Chen had given me. The metal clinked together, a sharp, clear sound in the quiet atrium. I let them dangle from my finger. Dad, you told me I couldn't afford the party, I said, my voice soft but firm. You were right. I paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. My father spent my life telling me to think smaller. So I just built a bigger world. That was the phrase that came to mind. My father had spent my life telling me to think smaller. So I just built a bigger world. I turned from his stunned face to my sister, whose eyes were now filled with tears of confusion and awe. Sophie, I said, and my voice was genuinely kind. If you and James would still like to have your engagement party here, the venue is yours. Free of charge. Consider it my gift. I had bypassed him. The transaction was no longer his to approve or deny. It was mine to offer, freely and with love, to my sister. Then, without waiting for a reply, I turned to Mr. Chen. Now, I said, my voice shifting to one of business. Shall we continue our walkthrough? I have some thoughts on the new irrigation system for the West Wing. I walked away, leaving my family standing speechless in the center of my magnificent, sun-drenched conservatory. I didn't look back. I was reborn, not as the child playing with a potted plant, but as the woman who owned the entire garden.